If you go back 7 or 8 years, Marvel Studios was undisputedly the king of Hollywood. Every movie was a guaranteed hit at both the box office and with audiences. Even though critics weren't as in love with the movies as general audiences, they didn't quite despise them either. There were even a few that were able to go a level above and be seen as genuinely great movies in their own right, standing out from the rest of the franchise. When you look back on it, it was honestly a crazy accomplishment. A decade's worth of 22 movies, all interconnected with characters that crossed over with each other, all telling one gigantic story. This was something that it would never be done again. It was even crazier that it was being done with these characters. Before the MCU, Marvel had sold off the film rights to their more popular characters like Spider-Man, Hulk, Fantastic Four, and the X-Men, and they were left with the scraps. Avengers like Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America were B-tier characters in the eyes of the general public, especially when compared to the likes of Superman and Batman. However, Marvel not only managed to turn these guys into household names, they went even further by doing the same thing with super obscure heroes like the Guardians of the Galaxy and Ant-Man. Avengers Infinity War and Endgame were cultural events, becoming two of the biggest movies of all time. Then, it was announced Disney had acquired 20th Century Fox, which meant the Fantastic Four and X-Men could finally be introduced to the MCU. It seemed like the future is bright, and Marvel would keep the money train going, but I think by this point everyone knows that isn't the case. After Endgame, Marvel has been on a very noticeable decline. The movies are making less money and receiving more and more criticism. The Multiverse saga has been an objective failure, and the MCU brand overall has lost so much of its cultural dominance. Sure, there's been a few bright spots, but in general, Marvel seems to have lost its touch. With the newest Captain America movie seeming to be another misfire, I want to go back to the beginning, see just how all of this went down. What really caused the downfall of the MCU? I think by Endgame, the cracks were starting to show. After the ending of Infinity War, we knew the characters killed by the snap would inevitably be back. Sequels to Black Panther and Spider-Man had already been announced, and even if they weren't, you knew Marvel wouldn't permanently kill off cash cows like these characters. So already the stakes are lowered, but really this is more of a comics issue than a fault of the movies. No comic book death is ever permanent. Pretty much every superhero has died and come back at some point. It's just the nature of the stories. But most general moviegoers don't read the comics, so they aren't accustomed to this, and I think it does have a negative effect when moments like these can be undone just like that. And introducing time travel, like they did in Endgame, just muddies stuff up even further. In my opinion, Endgame has a lot of flaws, and I don't even know if I'd put it in the upper tier of Marvel movies. But it did its job and gave a satisfying conclusion to the Infinity Saga. That's kind of the problem though. Endgame was a conclusion. It was an event that brought in pretty much every character that had been introduced up to that point, and served as the ending point for the two leads of the franchise, Tony Stark and Steve Rogers. It's kind of hard to keep being invested after something so monumental. This is another issue with adapting these comics. Captain America the character can be around forever, because he can be rebooted and passed from writer to writer, never needing to be anything but Captain America. Chris Evans, the actor, can only play the character so long before wanting to do something else. So Steve Rogers has to be written out at some point. When you've kept up with the movies and got invested into Evans' version of this character, it's obviously going to be a struggle when he's gone, but the story keeps moving. In a perfect world, Endgame is the actual end of the MCU, or at least the end for a while. Instead, a few months after, we get another Spider-Man movie, and it's on to the next. But I get it. You still have all these other characters people love, and you want to keep on making money. Fine. Let the franchise continue, and maybe we can slowly build back up to another Endgame level story. So at Comic-Con 2019, Marvel announces their next couple of films, and even introduces Disney Plus shows into the franchise. But then, a couple disasters strike that were pretty much out of Marvel's control. First, COVID-19 hits and shuts the entire world down, delaying several projects and making Marvel adjust their production plan. Then, the tragic passing of Chadwick Boseman, who was undoubtedly intended to be in the Chris Evans / Robert Downey Jr. role as a pillar of the next saga. But regardless of that, I think Phase 4 was already doomed from the start. Adding TV shows into the mix was a mistake, one that even CEO Bob Iger has acknowledged. Marvel simply took on too much. It was pumping out so much content at once. This made the quality go down and just overwhelmed audiences. It went from 2 to 3 movies spaced out over the course of a year to having to watch 3 to 4 movies and 4 to 5 TV shows in a year just to be able to keep up with the whole story. The brand had become diluted, and after a lot of people were already done following Endgame, this alienated those who remained too. That is simply too much to watch, especially when most of it was mediocre. WandaVision and Loki were successes, but all these years later, those are still pretty much the only Disney Plus shows to receive widespread praise, with everything else being mixed to downright hated. and things were no longer as interconnected. Besides What If, which could get away with a lot more due to it being animated, movie characters and TV characters were largely kept separate. Instead of building up the universe, it made it feel even more distant, and as a result also made the stories being told on Disney Plus feel much less important than what was told on the silver screen. The thing that made the MCU unique was how it was able to tell a sprawling story across different films, but now everything felt so separate, and beyond some references and Easter eggs, there wasn't really a lot that made this universe feel connected. Another reason the MCU was so successful was the characters were genuinely beloved. We were able to connect to Iron Man, Captain America, not only because we got to see them grow over the course of several movies, but RDJ and Chris Evans brought so much life to them. Because we were invested into the characters, we therefore got more invested into the stories. But with the MCU post-Endgame, there haven't been many characters who we're able to latch onto, and thus we care about the stories less. For example, let's just take a look at the main characters of every film in Phase 4 and see what they've been doing since. Black Widow. This one was already dead in the water because Natasha herself was dead, so this served to flesh out a character whose story was already over. We got introduced to Yelena Red Guardian, with Yelena making an appearance in Hawkeye a couple months later, and now both of them appearing in Thunderbolts coming out this year, 4 years after Black Widow. Shang-Chi hasn't been seen since. Sequel was announced shortly after the film was released, but not much news after that. Eternals, haven't been seen since, and no plans for a sequel. Spider-Man, sequel has been in development, but won't release until 2026, so that's 5 years between appearances for Peter Parker. Doctor Strange, hasn't been seen since. Thor, hasn't been seen since. Black Panther, hasn't been seen since. So out of 7 movies in Phase 4, the lead protagonists have not been seen or played any significant role since their film. That is an issue. Sure, most of them will probably appear in the upcoming Avengers movies, but why should we care? It'll have been 4 or 5 years since we've seen them. Unless people go back and do their homework, it's not likely they'll remember much about their movies or who even some of these people are. The Phase 4 TV shows are pretty much the same too. Loki is concluded. Wanda's dead. We're only just now getting any continuation of Sam Wilson's storyline, when he's supposed to be the one apparently leading the new version of the Avengers. Can't have the same emotional moments you got out of Infinity War and Endgame because we just do not care about any of the characters introduced. So like I said earlier, this saga is officially the Multiverse saga. Like with time travel, once you introduce the multiverse, things just get a lot more complicated. The general audience that Marvel is aiming for does not have the time nor the interest to keep up with multiple Earths and universes. It just becomes confusing. Also, like I said earlier with time travel, it lowers the stakes. Character can die and an alternate version or variant can come back a few projects later, so what's the point in caring? Also, with the concept of the multiverse has brought endless cameos. Now, some of these have actually been enjoyable, most notably the returns of Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire and Hugh Jackman. But for the most part, they just serve as cheap nostalgia. All of a sudden, we're supposed to cheer and jump out of our seats for the likes of Kelsey Grammer's Beast, Black Bolt from the Pan and Human Show, and Jennifer Garner's Elektra. Maybe this is just me, but I think at a certain point bringing back every Marvel character that was in a movie gets old after a little bit. This is just the biggest problem Marvel has had since Endgame. The movies just aren't as good anymore. Yeah, there's been bright spots like Spider-Man Guardians Volume 3, but most have ranged from safe and average to straight up bad. Nothing has reached the highs of the MCU's peak, and we've even reached some new lows. Eventually, the hype just dies down when people's expectations are so high, and they just end up with disappointment. This doesn't even mention how Kang the Conqueror was supposed to be the big bad of this saga, the new Thanos, yet they totally fumbled him. His first introduction is a small role in the Loki finale, and then the next time we see him, he loses to Ant-Man, of all people. So after they kill all this guy's mystique, the whole Jonathan Majors scandal happens, and instead of recasting, which they've done before and would make complete sense with this character of all characters, they just drop him completely. So now, what little they have been building towards is entirely pointless. We have an Avengers film coming out next year, but we have no clue who the Avengers even are or what threat they're fighting against. Marvel knows they're in a bad spot because they've scrambled to bring in Doctor Doom, an iconic villain who deserves a lot more build-up, and made the confusing choice to have him played by RDJ, hoping his star power can save things. But it just reeks of desperation to me, and I think it's clear they're in panic mode. I have hope for Fantastic Four that comes out later this year, but if that movie's bad, I think it's safe to say things are pretty much over. So, what did we learn today? How did Marvel fall so far? Really, just a whole combination of bad ideas and luck. A lack of care in building new characters and disappointing stories for older ones, the loss of their biggest stars, taking on too many projects at once, over-reliance on humor and nostalgia, and most importantly, hubris. Marvel thought they were too big to fail and they could pretty much pump out anything and people would watch. Who cares about unique stories with interesting characters? We're already on top. As long as the Marvel name is attached to it, people will watch anything. Well, obviously, at some point, people got tired of it. And I don't think this is a superhero movie problem. People will always love superheroes, but it's time for fresh new takes on them instead of the same Marvel formula. Look at all the love and praise for Matt Reeves' Batman, or all the hype for the upcoming James Gunn Superman. These are guys with unique visions. No surprise that the best MCU movies also come from people with unique visions. It's time for Marvel to make a shift, because their seat on the throne, Hollywood, is looking pretty vulnerable.